Letter 6. Description of the island of Martha's Vineyard and of the whale fishery. This island is 20 miles in length and from 7 to 8 miles in breadth, as you may see by the annexed map. It lies 9 miles from the continent, and with the Elizabeth Islands forms one of the counties of Massachusetts Bay, known by the name of Dukes County. Those latter, which are 6 in number, are about 9 miles distant from the vineyard, and are all famous for excellent dairies. A good ferry is established between Edgartown and Falmouth on the Main, the distance being 9 miles. Martha's Vineyard is divided into 3 townships, viz., Edgar, Chilmark, and Tisbury. The number of inhabitants is computed at about 4,000, 300 of which are Indians. References to the map of Martha's Vineyard. Starbuck Point, Benaiah Norton's house, the colonel of the island, the house of James Atherne, Esquire, Dr. Mayhew's house, iron mine, the ore of which is carried to the forges at Taunton, lagoon famous for catching bass under the ice, the best mowing grounds in the island, yielding 4 tons of black grass per acre, excellent planting ground, a mine of good pipe clay. Edgar is the best seaport and the shire town, and as its soil is light and sandy, many of its inhabitants follow the example of the people of Nantucket. The town of Chilmark has no good harbor, but the land is excellent, and no way inferior to any on the continent. It contains excellent pastures, convenient brooks for mills, stone for fencing, etc. The town of Tisbury is remarkable for the excellence of its timber, and has a harbor where the water is deep enough for ships of the line. The stock of the island is 20,000 sheep, 2,000 neat cattle, beside horses and goats. They have also some deer and abundance of sea fowls. This has been from the beginning, and is to this day, the principal seminary of the Indians. They live on that part of the island which is called Chappaquiddick, and were very early Christianized by the respectable family of the Mayhews, the first proprietors of it. The first settler of that name conveyed by will to a favorite daughter a certain part of it, on which there grew many wild vines. Thence it was called Martha's Vineyard, after her name, which in process of time extended to the whole island. The posterity of the ancient aborigines remain here to this day, on lands which their forefathers reserved for themselves, and which are religiously kept from any encroachments. The New England people are remarkable for the honesty with which they have fulfilled, all over that province, those ancient covenants, which in many others have been disregarded, to the scandal of those governments. The Indians there appeared, by the decency of their manners, their industry, and neatness, to be wholly Europeans, and nowise inferior to many of the inhabitants. Like them, they are sober, laborious, and religious, which are the principal characteristics of the 4 New England provinces. They often go, like the young men of the vineyard, to Nantucket and hire themselves for whalemen or fishermen, and indeed, their skill and dexterity in all sea affairs is nothing inferior to that of the whites. The latter are divided into 2 classes. The first occupy the land, which they till with admirable care and knowledge. The second, who are possessed of none, apply themselves to the sea, the general resource of mankind in this part of the world. This island, therefore, like Nantucket, is become a great nursery, which supplies with pilots and seamen the numerous coasters with which this extended part of America abounds. Go where you will from Nova Scotia to the Mississippi, you will find almost everywhere some natives of these 2 islands employed in seafaring occupations. Their climate is so favorable to population that marriage is the object of every man's earliest wish, and it is a blessing so easily obtained that great numbers are obliged to quit their native land and go to some other countries in quest of subsistence. The inhabitants are all Presbyterians, which is the established religion of Massachusetts. And here let me remember with gratitude the hospitable treatment I received from B. Norton, Esquire, the colonel of the island, as well as from Dr. Mayhew, the lineal descendant of the first proprietor. Here are to be found the most expert pilots, either for the Great Bay, their Sound, Nantucket Shoals, or the different ports in their neighborhood. In stormy weather, they are always at sea looking out for vessels, which they board with singular dexterity, and hardly ever fail to bring safe to their intended harbor. Gayhead, the western point of this island, abounds with a variety of ochres of different colors with which the inhabitants paint their houses. The vessels most proper for whale fishing are brigs of about 150 tons burden, particularly when they are intended for distant latitudes. They always man them with 13 hands in order that they may row 2 whaleboats, the crews of which must necessarily consist of 6, 4 at the oars, one standing on the bows with the harpoon, and the other at the helm. It is also necessary that there should be 2 of these boats, that if one should be destroyed in attacking the whale, the other, which is never engaged at the same time, may be ready to save the hands. 5 of the 13 are always Indians. The last of the complement remains on board to steer the vessel during the action. They have no wages. Each draws a certain established share in partnership with the proprietor of the vessel, by which economy they are all proportionably concerned in the success of the enterprise and all equally alert and vigilant. None of these whalemen ever exceed the age of 40. They look on those who are past that period not to be possessed of all that vigor and agility which so adventurous a business requires. Indeed, if you attentively consider the immense disproportion between the object assailed and the assailants, if you think on the diminutive size and weakness of their frail vehicle, if you recollect the treachery of the element on which this scene is transacted, the sudden and unforeseen accidents of winds, etc., you will readily acknowledge that it must require the most consummate exertion of all the strength, agility, and judgment of which the bodies and the minds of men are capable to undertake these adventurous encounters. As soon as they arrive in those latitudes where they expect to meet with whales, a man is sent up to the masthead. If he sees one, he immediately cries out, "Await Pawana! Here is a whale." They all remain still and silent until he repeats, "Pawana, a whale," when in less than 6 minutes the 2 boats are launched, filled with every implement necessary for the attack. They row toward the whale with astonishing velocity, and as the Indians early became their fellow laborers in this new warfare, you can easily conceive how the Natick expressions became familiar on board the whaleboats. Formerly, it often happened that whale vessels were manned with none but Indians and the master. Recollect also that the Nantucket people understand the Natick, and that there are always 5 of these people on board. There are various ways of approaching the whale according to their peculiar species, and this previous knowledge is of the utmost consequence. When these boats are arrived at a reasonable distance, one of them rests on its oars, and stands off as a witness of the approaching engagement. Near the bows of the other the harpooner stands up, and on him principally depends the success of the enterprise. He wears a jacket closely buttoned, and round his head a handkerchief tightly bound. In his hands he holds the dreadful weapon, made of the best steel, marked sometimes with the name of their town, and sometimes with that of their vessel, to the shaft of which the end of a cord of due strength, coiled up with the utmost care in the middle of the boat, is firmly tied. The other end is fastened to the bottom of the boat. Thus prepared they row in profound silence, leaving the whole conduct of the enterprise to the harpooner and to the steersman, attentively following their directions. When the former judges himself to be near enough to the whale, that is, at the distance of about 15 feet, he bids them stop. Perhaps she has a calf, whose safety attracts all the attention of the dam, which is a favorable circumstance. Perhaps she is of a dangerous species, and it is safest to retire, though their ardor will seldom permit them. Perhaps she is asleep. In that case he balances high the harpoon, trying in this important moment to collect all the energy of which he is capable. He launches it forth. She is struck. From her first movement they judge of her temper as well as of their future success. Sometimes, in the immediate impulse of rage, she will attack the boat and demolish it with one stroke of her tail. In an instant the frail vehicle disappears, and the assailants are immersed in the dreadful element. Were the whale armed with the jaws of the shark and as voracious, they never would return home to amuse their listening wives with the interesting tale of the adventure. At other times she will dive and disappear from human sight, and everything must then give way to her velocity, or else all is lost. Sometimes she will swim away as if untouched, and draw the cord with such swiftness that it will set the edge of the boat on fire by the friction. If she rises before she has run out the whole length, she is looked upon as a sure prey. The blood she has lost in her flight weakens her so much that if she sinks again, it is but for a short time. The boat follows her course with an almost equal speed. She soon reappears. Tired at last with convulsing the element which she tinges with her blood, she dies and floats on the surface. At other times it may happen that she is not dangerously wounded, though she carries the harpoon fast in her body, when she will alternately dive and rise and swim on with unabated vigor. She then soon reaches beyond the length of the cord and carries the boat along with amazing velocity. This sudden impediment sometimes will retard her speed. At other times it only serves to rouse her anger and to accelerate her progress. The harpooner, with the axe in his hands, stands ready. When he observes that the bows of the boat are greatly pulled down by the diving whale, and that it begins to sink deep and to take much water, he brings the axe almost in contact with the cord. He pauses, still flattering himself that she will relax, but the moment grows critical, unavoidable danger approaches. Sometimes men more intent on gain than on the preservation of their lives will run great risks, and it is wonderful how far these people have carried their daring courage at this awful moment. But it is vain to hope. Their lives must be saved. The cord is cut. The boat rises again. If after thus getting loose she reappears, they will attack and wound her a second time. She soon dies, and when dead, she is towed alongside of their vessel, where she is fastened. The next operation is to cut with axes and spades every part of her body which yields oil. The kettles are set a-boiling. They fill their barrels as fast as it is made, but as this operation is much slower than that of cutting up, they fill the hold of their ship with those fragments, lest a storm should arise and oblige them to abandon their prize. It is astonishing what a quantity of oil some of these fish will yield, and what profit it affords to those who are fortunate enough to overtake them. The river St. Lawrence whale, which is the only one I am well acquainted with, is 75 feet long, 16 deep, 12 in the length of its bone, which commonly weighs 3,000 lebis, 20 in the breadth of their tails, and produces 180 barrels of oil. I once saw 16 boiled out of the tongue only. After having once vanquished this leviathan, there are two enemies to be dreaded beside the wind, the first of which is the shark, that fierce voracious fish, to which nature has given such dreadful offensive weapons, often comes alongside, and in spite of the people's endeavors will share with them in their prey, at night particularly. They are very mischievous. But the second enemy is much more terrible and irresistible. It is the killer, sometimes called the thrasher, a species of whales about 30 feet long. They are possessed of such a degree of agility and fierceness as often to attack the largest spermaceti whales, and not seldom to rob the fishermen of their prey, nor is there any means of defense against so potent an adversary. When all their barrels are full, for everything is done at sea, or when their limited time is expired and their stores almost expended, they return home freighted with their valuable cargo, unless they have put it on board a vessel for the European market. Such are, as briefly as I can relate them, the different branches of the economy practiced by these bold navigators, and the method with which they go such distances from their island to catch this huge game. The following are the names and principal characteristics of the various species of whales known to these people. The River St. Lawrence whale just described, the disco, or Greenland ditto, the right whale, or 7 feet bone, common on the coasts of this country, about 60 feet long. The spermaceti whale, found all over the world and of all sizes. The longest are 60 feet and yield about 100 barrels of oil. The humpbacks, on the coast of Newfoundland, from 40 to 70 feet in length. The finback, an American whale never killed, as being too swift. The sulphur bottom, River St. Lawrence, 90 feet long. They are but seldom killed, as being extremely swift. The grampus, 30 feet long, never killed on the same account. The killer, or thrasher, about 30 feet. They often kill the other whales with which they are at perpetual war. The blackfish whale, 20 feet, yields from 8 to 10 barrels. The porpoise, weighing about 160 labi. In 1769 they fitted out 125 whalemen. The first 50 that returned brought with them 11,000 barrels of oil. In 1770 they fitted out 135 vessels for the fisheries, at 13 hands each. 4 West Indiamen, 12 hands, 25 wood vessels, 4 hands, 18 coasters, 5 hands, 15 London traders, 11 hands. All these amount to 2,158 hands employed in 197 vessels. Trace their progressive steps between the possession of a few whale boats and that of such a fleet. The moral conduct, prejudices, and customs of a people who live 2/3 of their time at sea must naturally be very different from those of their neighbors, who live by cultivating the earth. That long abstemiousness to which the former are exposed, the breathing of saline air, the frequent repetitions of danger, the boldness acquired in surmounting them, the very impulse of the winds to which they are exposed. All these, one would imagine, must lead them when on shore to no small desire of inebriation and a more eager pursuit of those pleasures of which they have been so long deprived, and which they must soon forego. There are many appetites that may be gratified on shore, even by the poorest man, but which must remain unsatisfied at sea. Yet, notwithstanding the powerful effects of all these causes, I observed here at the return of their fleets no material irregularities, no tumultuous drinking assemblies, whereas in our continental towns the thoughtless seaman indulges himself in the coarsest pleasures, and vainly thinking that a week of debauchery can compensate for months of abstinence, foolishly lavishes in a few days of intoxication the fruits of half a year's labor. On the contrary, it was peace here, and a general decency prevailed throughout. The reason, I believe, is that almost everybody here is married, for they get wives very young, and the pleasure of returning to their families absorbs every other desire. The motives that lead them to the sea are very different from those of most other seafaring men. It is neither idleness nor profligacy that sends them to that element. It is a settled plan of life, a well-founded hope of earning a livelihood. It is because their soil is bad that they are early initiated to this profession, and were they to stay at home, what could they do? The sea therefore becomes to them a kind of patrimony. They go to whaling with as much pleasure and tranquil indifference, with as strong an expectation of success, as a landman undertakes to clear a piece of swamp. The first is obliged to advance his time and labor to procure oil on the surface of the sea. The second advances the same to procure himself grass from grounds that produced nothing before but hassocks and bogs. Among those who do not use the sea, I observed the same calm appearance as among the inhabitants on the continent. Here I found, without gloom, a decorum and reserve so natural to them that I thought myself in Philadelphia. At my landing I was cordially received by those to whom I was recommended and treated with unaffected hospitality by such others with whom I became acquainted, and I can tell you that it is impossible for any traveler to dwell here 1 month without knowing the heads of the principal families. Wherever I went, I found a simplicity of diction and manners rather more primitive and rigid than I expected, and I soon perceived that it proceeded from their secluded situation, which has prevented them from mixing with others. It is therefore easy to conceive how they have retained every degree of peculiarity for which this sect was formerly distinguished. Never was a beehive more faithfully employed in gathering wax, bee bread, and honey from all the neighboring fields than are the members of this society. Every one in the town follows some particular occupation with great diligence, but without that servility of labor which I am informed prevails in Europe. The mechanic seemed to be descended from as good parentage, was as well dressed and fed, and held in as much estimation as those who employed him. They were once nearly related. Their different degrees of prosperity is what has caused the various shades of their community. But this accidental difference has introduced as yet neither arrogance nor pride on the one part, nor meanness and servility on the other. All their houses are neat, convenient, and comfortable. Some of them are filled with 2 families, for when the husbands are at sea, the wives require less house room. They all abound with the most substantial furniture, more valuable from its usefulness than from any ornamental appearance. Wherever I went, I found good cheer, a welcome reception, and after the second visit, I felt myself as much at my ease as if I had been an old acquaintance of the family. They had as great plenty of everything as if their island had been part of the Golden Quarter of Virginia, a valuable tract of land on Cape Charles. I could hardly persuade myself that I had quitted the adjacent continent where everything abounds, and that I was on a barren sandbank fertilized with whale oil only. As their rural improvements are but trifling and only of the useful kind, and as the best of them are at a considerable distance from the town, I amused myself for several days in conversing with the most intelligent of the inhabitants of both sexes, and making myself acquainted with the various branches of their industry, the different objects of their trade, the nature of that sagacity which, deprived as they are of every necessary material, produce, etc., yet enables them to flourish, to live well, and sometimes to make considerable fortunes. The whole is an enigma to be solved only by coming to the spot and observing the national genius, which the original founders brought with them, as well as their unwearied patience and perseverance. They have all, from the highest to the lowest, a singular keenness of judgment, unassisted by any academical light. They all possess a large share of good sense, improved upon the experience of their fathers, and this is the surest and best guide to lead us through the path of life, because it approaches nearest to the infallibility of instinct. Shining talents and university knowledge would be entirely useless here. Nay, would be dangerous. It would pervert their plain judgment. It would lead them out of that useful path which is so well adapted to their situation. It would make them more adventurous, more presumptuous, much less cautious, and therefore less successful. It is pleasing to hear some of them tracing a father's progress, and their own, through the different vicissitudes of good and adverse fortune. I have often by their firesides traveled with them the whole length of their career, from their earliest steps, from their first commercial adventure, from the possession of a single whaleboat up to that of a dozen large vessels. This does not imply, however, that everyone who began with a whaleboat has ascended to a like pitch of fortune. By no means. The same casualty, the same combination of good and evil which attends human affairs in every other part of the globe, prevails here. Great prosperity is not the lot of every man, but there are many and various gradations. If they all do not attain riches, they all attain an easy subsistence. After all, is it not better to be possessed of a single whaleboat or a few sheep pastures, to live free and independent under the mildest governments in a healthy climate, in a land of charity and benevolence, than to be wretched, as so many are in Europe, possessing nothing but their industry, tossed from one rough wave to another, engaged either in the most servile labors for the smallest pittance, or fettered with the links of the most irksome dependence, even without the hopes of rising. The majority of those inferior hands which are employed in this fishery, many of the mechanics, such as coopers, smiths, caulkers, carpenters, etc., who do not belong to the Society of Friends, are Presbyterians, and originally came from the Main. Those who are possessed of the greatest fortunes at present belong to the former. But they all began as simple whalemen. It is even looked upon as honorable and necessary for the son of the wealthiest man to serve an apprenticeship to the same bold, adventurous business which has enriched his father. They go several voyages, and these early excursions never fail to harden their constitutions and introduce them to the knowledge of their future means of subsistence.